Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to see you, and thank you all for joining. We're obviously meeting tonight to discuss a really grave, serious situation in the Middle East and to focus on Lebanon, which of course has been suffering for many years from multiple tragedies and disasters. We know that, whether it's the financial crash, the horrific Beirut port explosion, but now also since last October, it is engulfed in the conflict with Israel that has escalated massively since September and now has a ground invasion. And our speaker tonight, who I'll introduce in just a second, I'm sure will give us all the very latest, but just the sheer level of displacement of Lebanese, Syrians and others is quite extraordinary. A quarter of the population, the destruction of homes, even entire villages. It's very hard to watch, and I'm not Lebanese, and I know that this is a really traumatic experience for anybody associated with Lebanon, let alone those who live there. But we're really, really lucky this evening to have a really expert guide in Maha Yahya. She's the director of the Carnegie Middle East Center. You have her biography and can see all her considerable achievements, academic qualifications and so forth, 2 PhDs. She really is somebody, I think, who's one of the best people we could have asked to explain what is going on, the implications of everything in Lebanon, coming, of course, as part of that wider regional war that we are seeing, of course, with the genocide in Gaza and everything that's going on elsewhere as well. So, Maha, a very, very warm welcome to you. Just to remind everybody, please keep on mute, but also put your questions to Maha in the chat. I shall try to take as many of them as we can have time for. She'll speak for 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have Q&A. But Maha, thank you very much. I know it's very difficult to talk about your country and what's happening to your people at the moment. So, you know, we are particularly grateful for that. But take us through, if you will, how you see the current situation and how it's come about. Give us some sort of sense as to, you know, the just sheer scale of what is going on. I think we get tasters of it. And also, where do you see all this going? What would it achieve? Where will we land up as we sit, and we were discussing earlier, you know, on the cusp of this very pivotal American election that could influence the fate of so many countries, but obviously within the Middle East. Anyhow, we look forward to your thoughts, and thank you once again for joining us.
Good evening, Chris. Thank you for having me, and thank you to whoever has joined the call this evening. It's a pleasure to be with you again. I'm going to begin with just 2 or 3 kind of call/visits to frame what I'm going to talk about today. And the first is a speech that Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israel's Prime Minister, gave on October 8th, where he basically gave the Lebanese a stark choice. You either rise up against Hezbollah or risk turning into Gaza, which effectively was saying you either have a civil conflict or you turn into Gaza. And this speech came a bit after a couple of days after Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, visited Lebanon. And his visit was in part to scuttle what seemed like a move by Lebanese politicians, the Prime Minister, the Speaker of Parliament, Wali Jumblat, the head of the PSP, to try and get a ceasefire in place quickly. Of course, this was coming after the terror pager attack. It was coming after the assassination, the multiple assassinations we'd seen of Hezbollah's military commanders, and then Hassan Nasrallah. So there had been a sequence of events, and the bombardments had already started. The ground invasion of Lebanon had already started. So Arakshi came to Lebanon to say, no, we're the ones who decide on a ceasefire. His visit was not very well received in Lebanon, to the point where the Speaker of Parliament came the following week, in part to repair and in part to also shore up morale amongst Hezbollah as well. I mean, it was the same as Araji's visit, to shore up morale, within Hezbollah ranks, and to provide support that was very badly needed. I begin with those two things to say that Lebanon today has become the active theater, if you like, of a war between Israel and Iran. And for me, what is happening in Lebanon today is not just about Lebanon and Hezbollah, but could be part of the first Slavo that Israel is preparing as part of a broader strategy to weaken Iran. And this is where a lot of the talk of Benjamin Netanyahu about a new regional order, talking to the Iranians, a few weeks ago, telling them you'll soon have a new regime in place, things like this. All of this tells you that the declared goals of the attack on Lebanon, which is the return of Israelis displaced from northern Israel, is in a way a smokescreen. And the expansion of military activity in Lebanon and the way we've seen says that it's a lot more than about the return of populations who've been displaced from the north. So what are we seeing today? What we're seeing today in Lebanon is massive destruction. It already has exceeded in scale the 2006 war between Hezbollah and Israel. About 20 to 30 villages and towns across Lebanon's border with Israel have been completely destroyed. What wasn't destroyed with aerial bombardments has been dynamited. And the imagery is just absolutely horrendous. In the space of 4 days, when the conflict began in earnest, 1.2 million people were displaced. For any country, that's about 20% of Lebanon's population. For any country, that's already a huge number. And this is a country, as you mentioned, Chris, has already been going through a massive economic and financial crisis, political deadlock, the Beirut port explosion. I mean, all of these had added to the misery of the country in a way. And just as to give one figure as an indication, about 40% of the Lebanese were deemed to be below the poverty line. This is a recent study by the World Bank. So in a sense, it's a country where the toll of this conflict is not just one additional crisis, but it could be what could break the country's back in a sense, because of the scale of destruction, the scale of displacement. Israel has not limited its bombardments to the border zone, but has extended to villages and towns and cities across Lebanon. It's threatened UNESCO cultural sites, heritage sites. These are global commons like Baalbek and Sur. There's also what we can see from Israel's tactics in Lebanon is almost a multi-pronged strategy. So on the one hand, you have these mass evacuation orders for large groups of people. I mean, one of them was literally, they ordered 250,000 people to leave Nabatea and its regions. So that's created significant push on the government. Today, there are Lebanese who have no place to shelter, and they're sleeping on the streets of Beirut and in public spaces. And now it's winter. We're moving into the winter season. There's also been I mean, much of the onslaught is on Christian area, on predominantly Shia areas. So there's this sense of a collective punishment, a war of Israel against the Shia community. And this is irrespective of any kind of connection to Hezbollah. I can only understand the bombardments, for example, of the historic center of Nabateeh or of Bint Jbeil in that context. It's about making it simply unlivable, making it impossible for people to go back and resume any kind of economic activity, even in the near future. And Nabateeh is not within the border, kind of border zone, if you want. In that border zone, they've also used phosphorus to kill. White phosphorus is a chemical that has basically it makes it impossible to use agricultural land again for a very long time. It's very poisonous. And these areas are predominantly agricultural. It's uprooted olive trees. I mean, one can talk about the economic repercussions of what's happening beyond just the destruction, which, as I said, is already massive. So there is also that element. On top of this, there's also been this targeted killing, not targeted assassinations, which we've seen over the past year, targeting cars, people on motorcycles. There's been a security breach within Hezbollah of a colossal scale, as we've seen in the past year. But it's actually hitting, bringing down entire buildings in areas that are, again, not predominantly Hezbollah, under the pretext of targeting some mid to low level member of Hezbollah that no one literally has heard of. At the time when if they really were after this individual, they already have the technology that allows them to take this person out without causing the kind of damage that they've been causing. And I think this tactic of literally, I mean, we've seen these images, all of us, of a building suddenly collapsing as if it's a controlled demolition in the middle of areas that were deemed safe to some extent in Lebanon. For example, the hitting of an apartment in Kola, which is within the municipal boundaries, or the attack in near Bashura. It was an NGO that is related, a health NGO related to Hezbollah. etc., or an attack in Aito, which is a predominantly Christian area, but two displaced families, families that were displaced from the south, had taken refuge there. They literally took out, I think, 23 people, if not more, died. All of them, and the majority were women and children, all of them displaced from the south, because there was one person there who was affiliated with Hezbollah and who was going there to basically distribute money. He's been distributing money to the displaced. So it didn't make sense. Why would they target him and take out all of these people? Part of this, I think, is psychological, to create an element of fear. And we feel this and we see this. People are terrified now of hosting displaced. There is a lot of reluctance to rent out to people they don't know, etc. And this is creating a lot of internal pressure within Lebanon between the various communities. At a time when already resentment against Hezbollah within other communities had increased tremendously over the past, again, I'd say a decade and a half at the very least, in part because they refused to disarm after the year 2000 and Israel's unilateral withdrawal from Lebanon, but also because of their perceived responsibility in the assassination of former Prime Minister Rafi al-Hariri and the political assassinations that took place afterwards, in trying to scuttle the investigation into the port explosion, etc., etc. I mean, one can go on. So tensions had already been increasing and resentment was increasing amongst them. So where does that leaves us in terms of the war, I would say, on Lebanon, Israel's war on Lebanon, but also in terms of in terms of its war on the Shiite community, I would say. I think for Iran, and here we need to kind of, again, expand the lens a little bit. Iran sees the attacks also on Lebanon and on Hezbollah as the first, as this kind of, I mean, Hezbollah was the primary line of defense for Iran. So it does see the attack against Hezbollah, the degradation of its financial and military capacities and its political leadership as part of that. However, this will not do away with Hezbollah. So the Israeli calculus, or Bibi Netanyahu's calculus, this will somehow do away with Hezbollah, is completely wrong. This is a big organization. It has a network of NGOs. Its mid-level personnel are still operating. They are trying to do what they can to continue working. And we've seen them reorganize themselves now on the military side. And there is some resistance happening in the south against the ground incursion of Israeli troops. From Hezbollah's perspective, I think the longer this continues, they're very worried because this can drag on and on and on. And the longer it drags, the more, again, tensions it creates internally within Lebanon. They would like to see, I think, a ceasefire in place as soon as possible to give people a breathing space, to give the Lebanese a breathing space, to be able to collect and recollect. Already the task of a post-conflict day after is huge. And there will need to be a lot of compromises made along that road, again, given the scale of destruction. So I think in this case, in this context, when the missiles do end up stopping, we're going to be facing a very critical juncture. And this is, I think, where the current political leadership, Lebanese political leadership, is missing the boat, so to speak. Because while, you know, everybody and their uncle is involved in the ceasefire in Lebanon and the conflict in Lebanon, as I began with, I see this as part of a larger tug of war between the Israelis and the Iranians. But there is quite a bit that the local leadership can do. And that includes coming together not only to elect a president. This has been, we've been without a president for the past 2 years, to put a government in place that's able to move quickly in handling the crisis, begin thinking about how to deal with the ramifications of this crisis. Just to give one indication, only 19% of those displaced today are being dealt with by the government. They're the ones sheltering them. The rest are out on the street or paying huge prices for rental units. And this is where, if that trajectory is to be adopted, there needs to also be an inclusive discourse, initiation of some sort of a national dialogue that brings Hezbollah into this discussion of where the country is going to go. I think that's crucial. That also includes a dialogue and a discussion around what a national defense strategy could look like. There was a discussion and agreement around the national defense strategy during the era of President Michel Sleiman, and then that was never implemented and they never moved away with it. I think these are crucial issues and these are within the purview of the local Lebanese leadership, and that could at least help protect Lebanon while the larger issue of political settlement is being worked out. And I think some of that will depend very much on what's going to happen in the US elections, who gets elected, and what that would mean for Israel's continued war on Lebanon, but I would say also on Gaza. What we've seen in Gaza is horrific. It's now we're upwards of 42,000 dead, massive war crimes, ethnic transfer. I don't need to go into all of those details. So this is where we are today. I'll stop here and open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Maha. That was very clear, very powerful, compelling, but also very troubling. I wonder if I could just take chair's privilege and kick off with a question. What do you expect the international community to do? I say international community very ill-advisedly, perhaps, because there's barely such a thing. But, you've got Britain here. What should states like Britain, France, Germany do? Not least as the United States in this period of uncertainty about who's going to be president, etc. And that could go on. It may not be resolved, tomorrow. We may have to wait for some time for that. What do you expect European powers, even major regional actors, to do to try to help Lebanon?
Well, first and foremost, apply immediate pressure on Israel to stop the war. There is no way out of this without international. Israel has been able to get away with what it has gotten away with, literally getting away with murder over the past year and something now in Palestine, in Gaza, and now in Lebanon, because the international response has continued to be supportive. And even when it is critical, it's a very mild, very quiet criticism that has not risen up to the task of what we're seeing in Gaza alone, let alone in Lebanon. So I think there needs to be a lot more pressure, and not just in terms of carrots. Oh, if you stop the war, this is what we'll do, but actually in terms of sticks, which includes potential sanctions, which includes calling a spade, and saying what you're doing are tantamount to war crimes. I won't go into the question of genocide, but in Gaza, there definitely are war crimes being committed, as well as in Lebanon. We are seeing the Gaza playbook being used in Lebanon in the sense of massive destruction, the targeting of journalists, the targeting of healthcare workers. I think upwards of 170 healthcare workers have been killed in Lebanon over the past year. So there needs to be accountability for all of this. Everyone else is held accountable but Israel, and this needs to stop.
Well, we got some questions in the chat, and a K Abbott. I don't know if Mr. or Miss Abbott is with us. If you want to put your question, or I could read it out.
I think I can see the question.
I see.
Go ahead.
Yeah, how would the Lebanese take their country back from Hezbollah and its Iranian backers without the help of a powerful country, a state? This is the cost of years of government neglect, failure to enforce 1701. So Israel is hitting that alternative power, which it now sees as a threat all the way to the Litani. Why didn't Lebanon send the army to the border along with UNIFIL? So.
Well, first, Israel is hitting far beyond the Litani, and that's one of the issues. I mean, some of the evacuation orders or diktats that have come out have really gone way beyond Litani. They're talking about Al-Awali, which is near Saida, plus other areas in the Bekaa, etc. The implementation of 1701, as well, the person who asked knows, Hezbollah has refused the implementation of 1701 for a long time under the pretext of there are still areas, land occupied by Israel, Lebanese land occupied by Israel, which includes the Shiba farms. I won't go into the details of the Shiba farms, and there are other areas that they considered Lebanese, and that no one can, there still needs to be a defense for Lebanon. This is the pretext. Obviously, they were there also, I think, in large part to, as I said earlier, first line of defense for Iran. I think that as part of the ceasefire negotiations today, 1701 has been least from what we can see, more or less accepted. I think it's, I won't say it's a given, but it is very much on the table. And I think its implementation today would be a much quicker and a much more viable option than it was, 15, 16 years ago, if not more.
Thank you very much.
Now, and Hezbollah has indicated, by the way, that they've sent out signals that its implementation is now more acceptable.
Now, we got a question also from Lika Nahal, or Nahul. I'm not sure if I pronounced your name wrong. Apologies about that. Lika, are you there? Well, I'll ask the question. Are you hopeful that the Lebanese government, with its various groups as set up under its constitution, might be able to work collaboratively to improve the lot of its citizenry? I suppose this is a question going, looking somewhat into the future as to, how Lebanon, may sort out its challenges in terms of governance.
Unfortunately, not so far. I haven't seen many glimmers of hope that they will move in that direction. What I'm seeing actually is that some of the political leadership is already sees that Hezbollah has been weakened, and there is already some sort of struggle for power internally within Lebanon. And that, for me, is very worrisome. Struggle over the presidency. There is, you can already see that. And this is why I was emphasizing this need for an inclusive discourse, one that brings in the Shia community into the discussion as part of the solution and not as the problem as a community, I'm talking, but also the political representation of that community. But until now, no, I'm not very hopeful. Who knows? Miracles could happen. We're coming on Christmas, so maybe. Yeah.
And, but looking forward, obviously Lebanon's sectarian politics have held it back. Do you think that there will be some sort of mood change to really challenge the entrenched system that's there in Lebanon at the end of all of this, to try to... one thing I always find is Lebanese politicians often say, yes, we need to do this, but
they never do it.
Nobody ever moves, and they're always worried about losing their particular stake in that system should they move.
The problem is the impulse to talk about state building, and for me, out of this horror that we're living, there is an opportunity with the reconstruction, with the rebuilding, to also talk about rebuilding the state and its institutions. The state has been weakened first by the as you talked, by the predatory nature of political governance in Lebanon, but now also in state capture by the different political groups, and then by the economic and financial crisis of 5 years ago. So I think there is an opportunity here to use the reconstruction, the rebuilding of what has been destroyed as part and parcel of a larger plan to rebuild the institutions of the state. The problem is that the impetus for this and the push for this kind of a discourse, this thinking, is coming from outside those that are in power right now. So and we saw this in 2019. There is a broad cross-section of Lebanese citizenry who've been pushing in that direction. The election results at the time showed that there is a move, a demand, particularly by a younger generation of Lebanese who want to see a different Lebanon. Whether we'll be able to push through this at this point, in the next phase, I think a lot of it will depend on how this war ends and what the international community does, because this war will not end without the support of the international community, and the rebuilding will not happen without tremendous support from the international community. And I think this is where the role of countries like the UK, the EU, and others comes in. plus Arab countries. What will the political cost of supporting and rebuilding these areas destroyed in this conflict? There has to be some sort of conditionalities that are connected to state building. And this is if you want to kind of fast forward. It will be the only way for Lebanon to re-emerge, I won't say better, given the horror of what we're living through, but at least maybe with a more positive outlook than what we're seeing today. I mean, rather than go in the direction of civil strife, which is a serious concern, if things continue deteriorating the way they're happening right now, or we go in the direction of really rebuilding state and institutions.
Yeah. I just wondered, because you mentioned European powers there, France has obviously taken or tried to take a big role. How do you see Macron's sort of approach to all of this? Because, he seems to have made a lot of noise in the past about Lebanon, but has France really been able to be helpful in any way?
I mean, it's good to have someone speak up for Lebanon in the international arena when no one else is. So it's and France always has had, because of the French mandate, the history of the two countries. So there's this kind of benevolence towards Lebanon to some extent. I mean, the last I think 2 weeks ago, there was the Lebanon conference. They were able to raise about $1 billion, 800 for humanitarian support and 200 for the army. And this, again, I think where the international community needs to also provide a lot of support. If we really want 1701 to be implemented and the army to be able to go into South Lebanon along with the UNIFIL, they need to be armed properly. There are lots of vetoes about what kind of arms the Lebanese army can carry and cannot carry. They need to be given the mandate, not given the mandate, they already have the mandate, but given the kind of support, but also the financial support. Again, we're operating in a context of complete economic and financial collapse in Lebanon. The army would not have survived until now without external support, including cash transfers to some of its members. So, yeah.
We've got a question from Roger Higginson. Roger, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, Chris, I just got visitors. Did you want me to articulate my question?
Ask your question. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much. And you, Maha, thank you for an interesting, albeit slightly pessimistic overview of the situation in Lebanon. I'm just curious to know, one of the differences between Lebanon and Gaza, of course, is that Western media do still have access to the country. Does this give you any grounds for optimism that it might be possible to generate international pressure on Israel to cut back its offensive somewhat? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, no, I completely agree with you. I haven't seen any indication. I mean, frankly, the Israeli government is just doing what it wants to do. Let's not forget, we're talking about a practically messianic government and the way they approach things. So it's they've just, there is what the international coverage is doing is highlighting things that may not be visible in Gaza. It also makes it a lot more difficult for Israel to say, it's this is a local person, this is a Palestinian who's covering this. They must be Hamas, because of course all Gazans are Hamas in the Israeli narrative. In Lebanon, when it's a CNN reporter saying, this is what I'm seeing, I've gone to this hospital, or a BBC reporter or a Sky News reporter saying, I went to this hospital and there are no hidden tunnels, there is no access to some. They did this with a hospital in Beirut, where the Israeli army claimed that the hospital, they were going to bomb the hospital because there's a hidden access from the hospital to supposedly some big underground bunker of Hezbollah where all the gold bars and money are stacked. And the owner of the hospital, who's a member of parliament, by the way, he's the deputy for the Foreign Affairs Committee, came out and said, I'll open all doors. Journalists, please come to the hospital, and you're free to walk wherever you want. Open any door you feel you want to open, ask for access anywhere in the hospital. And there was nothing. And the journalists were, so it becomes very difficult to say, no, it's not the case. This is where I say that it's the Gaza playbook, but in Lebanon, it becomes slightly more difficult, particularly in the areas where journalists do have access, like Beirut. In the south, local journalists have been targeted. There was a hit against a compound that was housing journalists 2 or 3 weeks ago, and 3 journalists died. So there is Israel's track record of killing journalists is pretty much out there. I think the conflict in Gaza has been the highest in terms of journalists killed. Again, with impunity. The impunity needs to stop. We can't have 2 standards where, if it's Russia doing this in Ukraine, everyone's up in arms.
Absolutely.
Whereas if it's Israel doing this in Gaza or in Lebanon, we'll look the other way. Actually, there must be something else going on. So,
strongly agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Now, Sadaf Chowdhury has got a question about Iran. Sadaf, are you there?
Hi there. Hi. Thank you, Maha, for your time. So my question is, Iran is using proxies, and what is the long-term ramifications of this strategy? Is there anything that can be done to thwart it? And secondly, can Lebanon even defend itself against this?
Against the proxies, you mean?
Yes.
Well, Hezbollah for the longest time was really more of a partner. Hassan Nasrallah, people think of him as the Secretary General of Hezbollah, but Hassan Nasrallah was a regional figure. He was a key interlocutor with the groups in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria, and in Lebanon, and he was a trusted partner of Iran. His loss, I think, is significant for the Iranians. Hezbollah is a Lebanese entity. People their MPs are Lebanese. People who belong to Hezbollah are Lebanese. So I think that's why I come back to this issue of an inclusive discourse. Yes, they've been weakened militarily now with everything that has happened, everything that Israel has done so far, but it is an organization that is Lebanese, and we need to deal with that. And we need to, again, have an inclusive discourse internally in terms of how to move forward. There is no way out of that. Just speaking of proxies, sorry?
Sorry to interrupt. How possible do you think this discourse is? Because I've been in Lebanon for the last 3 weeks, and I've asked many people this question, and they pause, and they're like, anytime soon, we hope. How do you feel about that? Same sentiment?
Anytime soon. That's why I said it's up. The onus is on Lebanon's political leadership on this issue. And I'm not seeing that push at this moment. Again, there was an initiative by the Speaker of Parliament, the Prime Minister, and Walid Jumblat to try and get something going. And they were beginning to reach out to other political parties. But then Araghchi came and visited and kind of scuttled that momentum somewhat. But I still think the onus is, there's nothing preventing them from calling for a national dialogue today, right now. Forget about electing a president. Let's begin with a national dialogue, or electing a president that would unlock as part of a package around a national dialogue. How are we going to get out of this? What is the vision we have for Lebanon? How will we go about rebuilding? There are so many questions one can ask. Lebanon did not need to be embroiled in this. It could have been, this unity of front strategy that was put in place by, Nasrallah played an important role in that, but this unity front strategy of Iran-affiliated groups and proxies basically got Lebanon dragged into a conflict. One can say that Israel has clearly been preparing for this for many years now. This wasn't a spur of the moment attack. The pagers they've been in, I mean, the whole pager operation had been in the pipeline for at least 2-3 years. They'd been gathering intel for also many years now. So they'd been preparing for this. That's why I stay away from questions of, had there not been a Hezbollah, would there have been a war? I'm not going to go there. But what I do know is at least Lebanon could have defended the position by not getting embroiled in this, getting dragged into this in a sense. And just on this point, by the way, Ayatollah Sistani, yesterday, I think it was yesterday or today, came out and called, this is in Iraq, because there's now talk that some of the rockets that will be used, or the missiles that will be used in Iran's presumed upcoming attack on Israel, which word from what we're hearing may happen tonight or tomorrow. Some of those missiles might come from Iraq. And Sistani came out earlier today and said there needs to be a, taking away a demilitarization of all these non-state actors, which indicates, I mean, people aren't happy. They don't want their territories to be used in this kind of broader conflict.
Thank you, Maha.
Maha, I wonder if I could just take you to look at another neighbor we haven't really mentioned, and that's Syria. Often in the past, when we've seen a crisis in either Syria or Lebanon, it's been the other that has managed to help those people. And of course, now what we're seeing is, of course, that Syria, those border crossings have been bombed by the Israelis, but a large number of both Lebanese and Syrians have gone into Syria, but Syria isn't in a fit state to host them. How do you see the situation in Syria, the role of Syria playing into all of this, and many attacks by Israel on targets within Syria?
And that's one of the things that Israel is doing is it has upped its ante, so to speak. We're seeing increasing number of attacks in Syria on whether it's Iranian or Hezbollah positions or assets in Syria, trying to cut off weapons supply lines into Lebanon. But I think there's also been very strong messaging to Bashar al-Assad in terms of, stay out of this, otherwise it's your turn next, literally. And Assad does not want to get involved. I mean, it wasn't just about targeting. We saw a commando operation in southern Syria 2 days ago, where there was a group of Israeli, I think, special ops who kidnapped a Syrian from Daraa, from the city of Saida near Daraa, in Daraa. We saw also something like this 2 days earlier in Batroun in Lebanon, or a day earlier. So it's, I think for Syrians today, for Syria as an official position, they would want to stay out of this, and they would rather not have their territories also used to launch attacks on Israel. But the question is, to what extent does Bashar al-Assad have control over his territory? I think that's a different issue altogether, because he clearly does not have control over most of his borders, most of Syria's borders. And this is where the Russian role comes in, because I think also Russia is, hedging its bets between its relationship with Iran, gets supplies of drones from Iran. It has a very special relationship, and between also its relationship with Israel, and not wanting to, threaten that relationship. All the Israeli overflights over Syria happen with Russian acquiescence. So everybody hedging their bets and trying to figure out what's best for them. I think Russia would not mind seeing a weakened Iran in Syria, but would not want to see a defeated Iran in the region, at least not now.
Yeah, I think it's very noticeable that the Syrian regime has been quite quiet in terms of its official media, in terms of what's going on.
No, from the beginning, they've been very quiet. Even when Gaza started, they've been very quiet, staying on the sidelines. I mean, they can't really speak up for the Palestinians. We haven't forgotten what they did to the Palestinians in Yarmouk, but they really have been on the sidelines for the past year and a half, and trying to stay out of it. I think there's also the relationship with the UAE that, and the UAE is playing an important role also in the region, leveraging, I mean, it has its own relationship with Israel, but it also has its relationship with other Arab countries, and trying to kind of leverage these relationships with each other or against each other. I mean, it's
yeah.
And for me, that's where, by the way, a lot of the pressure that should be coming is not coming, which is from Arab countries. We haven't seen the kind of pressure one would have expected a year after the carnage in Syria and Gaza, and now after a month and something in Lebanon, the kind of real pressure to stop this and move on.
We haven't mentioned Saudi Arabia. It used to be a big player in Lebanon. Is there any sense that it might take a more active role?
Not so far. They've been supplying quite a bit of humanitarian support to Lebanon this past month to help with the crisis. But on the political front, I haven't seen anything really significant in that way. Where we've seen them move is on Gaza, where I mean, 2 days, I think 2-3 days ago, last week, they hosted the first conference for the coalition for a two-state solution. I don't think a lot came out of it, but there's going to be a follow-up now. So they're trying to build momentum around the two-state solution. They've made a normalization with Israel, conditioned on a two-state solution. But the probability and the viability of a two-state solution, I think, is a topic for another discussion.
Absolutely. Now, we had another question from Lika, but she actually is asking about the UK using its presidency of the UN Security Council. We're now going to become the president, hold the presidency for a while. And, what effective sticks can be applied? You mentioned sticks rather than carrots earlier on. And she says, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, says he wants the Security Council to address the situation in Sudan, but as she says, not at the expense of downplaying the situation in Gaza and Lebanon. So what sort of sticks, perhaps, do you think the UK could try to push international actors to use to stop what's going on?
First, let me say that I'm glad there's some attention being given to Sudan, where the situation has really been overshadowed by Gaza and Lebanon, but the situation there is also horrific. We're talking about a humanitarian crisis of gargantuan proportions. So I think it's very important for someone to champion Sudan, and David Lammy could be a good champion. But yes, that should not come at the expense of Gaza, which is, I think, of clear importance to Britain as well. The kinds of sticks we're talking about are Security Council resolutions, the threat of sanctions. I mean, there's a lot that the Security Council can do in that arena to try and push forward and say, now, whether Israel complies or not is another story. But until now, it's been, again, a year and something of carnage, and we haven't seen almost a single Security Council resolution that has been unanimously adopted, and that holds what Israel is doing to task. I find it outrageous in that sense.
Yeah, we certainly would like to see it do a great deal more. Now we've got a question from Olivia Palmer. Olivia, are you with us? Hi.
I am, yes.
Hi, Olivia. Go ahead and ask your question of Maha.
Hi there. Thank you so much for such an insightful discussion. It's been a fascinating talk. My first question was essentially to ask how British citizens can put pressure on the government to cease support for Israel's genocide. We've seen kind of, in some cases, weekly demonstrations on the street, a number of actions that have been taken. We've seen the ceasing of 30 military licenses. However, this is against a number of military licenses that is over 300. And there's obviously diplomatic cover for Israel's genocidal crimes. Unfortunately, that is being supported by the UK. So at a bit of a loss there. So keen to hear your thoughts. And then my second question is perhaps a bit philosophical, but it's really what can it take for the Western-backed violence against the countries of the Levant and the wider West Asia region to end? This has been a very unfortunate kind of recurring pattern with a long history. Yeah, I'm not sure. I hope that we'll see the end of it, and would like to hear your thoughts there. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Look, in terms of UK citizens, I think pushing, pushing for arms transfers to Israel to stop. I know there were some arms, there was some, embargo on some arms, but not on everything. And even though the UK might not be supplying a lot of arms, but it's still significant and it's symbolic because it's the UK. There's a lot of cooperation between the UK's, intelligence services and Israel. From what we understand, some of the intelligence that the Israelis are getting on Gaza and on Lebanon is coming from UK intelligence services. That could be up for discussion, though we don't know the full nature, and much of it is, speculation. But there is evidence that there is some cooperation happening there. So I think a lot more pressure in terms of we need to stop this, because the more this continues, the more there is a license to kill for Israel. And that license needs to be revoked, and it has to be revoked now before we can move to the next phase. And this is where this issue of violence against the Levant, the level of dehumanization of Palestinian and now Lebanese lives that we've seen in the press, in political discourse, it's just astonishing to me. I find it always interesting when I have conversations with colleagues, both in the civil service or out. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of empathy. There's a lot of understanding of the issues. But what happens is this never somehow filters up. What's happening, the way decision-making is being done in the upper echelons within the political, within the cabinet is another ballgame. And it's almost like there's a disconnect between the broader understanding of the ramifications of this blanket support for Israel that is flaunting every single international law it possibly can. Beyond, even it's not just about Gaza or Lebanon. In the ramifications, I think we're going to live with for a very long time in terms of what it means to talk about the global order, what it means to talk about international human rights, etc. So I think that's partly where the pressure has to come in. Talking to your MPs, getting the MPs to adopt certain legislation within Parliament, etc. I believe in bottom-up approach pressure, because the top-down is not working.
We've got one question from Vina. How much impact do you think that boycott, divestment and sanctions are having currently? I guess that's a follow-up to what you were just talking about. Can citizen power make a difference through that? Are you a believer?
It's a thorny issue. So I'm... Look, I haven't followed this closely enough to be able to talk about it. What I would say is when that was applied in the case of apartheid South Africa, it worked. When we think of Israel, Israel is an apartheid state today. It already, you have two legal frameworks for two different communities, even within Israel proper to some extent. And when you talk about the occupied territories, that becomes even more amplified. So it did work in the context of South Africa. I think the way it gets applied in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian question is another story. But there definitely needs to be at least a level of sanctions, and I would say definitely, stopping the arms transfer and increasing pressure in any way possible on Israel to cease and desist. Chris?
Right, we have one final question from Brian Parrott, who's asked me to read it out. He's talking about Baalbek, and of course Israel has demanded that it is evacuated, and he's saying the city is nowhere near the Israeli border. Is anywhere in Lebanon safe for displaced people to go to Sunni and Maronite places? What's the strategy, the Israeli strategy behind this?
The Israeli, for me, from what I see, again, what we can read into it is a politics of absolute fear. That's why I was talking about Israel's war to some extent on the Shia community, because for the most part, these are the areas that have been targeted. Both those that are affiliated with Hezbollah or not affiliated with Hezbollah. People have been displaced multiple times. I'll give an example. Many of those who live in Baalbek or come or live in the southern suburbs originally come from Baalbek or its areas. So when they had to leave the southern suburbs, they moved back to their homes in Baalbek. Now they're being forced to leave again from Baalbek. They can't go back home. They go somewhere else in the Bekaa, then they get displaced again. There have been multiple rounds of displacement. So it's really instilling a politics of terror amongst the Lebanese. And then even areas, as I mentioned earlier, that are considered safe, mainly predominantly Christian areas, let's say, or predominantly Druze areas, etc. Even those areas are being hit. They're being hit with targeted attacks. So it's not the massive bunker busters that we've seen used in the southern suburbs. And I actually should mention here one thing that I find absolutely horrific is the extent to which Israel has normalized the targeting of residential civilian areas with the express purpose, not of taking out Hassan Nasrallah. I mean, we're estimating that with the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, there were 6 buildings that were literally evaporated in seconds. They turned into dust. These 6 buildings were 6 to 8 floors. So if you take an average of 7 floors per building, 2 apartments per building, let's say 5 people per apartment, that's 350 people per apartment. We're not talking about people on the street. Assume half of those had already left the southern suburbs. Talking about 1,000 people killed in this space in a split second to take out Hassan Nasrallah. So that's the kind of scale of normalization. It's not being talked about because simply it's impossible to tally. With these bunker busters, people evaporate. And this sense that it's okay, it's normal to target these areas has now permeated everywhere else. So killing 2 displaced families, 23 people in Aito, makes people that they really feel that they're not safe anywhere, and anyone can be hit at any point in time. They've targeted cars on major highways. There was one video of an attack on a highway of a couple. He was a Hezbollah member. He was riding with his wife. They realized that a drone was coming after them. So they got out of the car and hid in the bushes. And the drone went after them and killed them. So it hit the car, they got out of it, it went, I mean, it's almost like science fiction. And people are trapped, and they're just ping-ponging from one place to the other. It's just, I can't begin to describe how horrific it is in that sense. And Lebanon is a tiny country. It's a place that, as you've mentioned, they've bombed the borders between Lebanon and Syria. So most of the land borders are gone. The maritime is being monitored. By the way, Israel is also monitoring all planes that land in the airport. The airport is still open. It's primarily Middle East Airlines. But for example, they've said that if any Iranian airplane tries to land, they will shoot it down. A few days ago, they turned away an Iraqi flight. So they're controlling the skies, they're controlling the sea, and they're controlling the land borders. So the country is locked in a sense, without it being an official blockage.
That's, well, I'm afraid perhaps appropriate, a very saddening way to end, but that is unfortunately the reality that faces Lebanon, and at the moment. It's really quite awful. I'm sure everybody on the call would first of all like to thank you, Maha, for speaking to us tonight in these really difficult circumstances, and to share with us your thoughts and expertise. It really is truly appreciated. And for all those who parrot that cliched line of Lebanese are just so resilient and all the rest of it, it's nobody should have to go through all of this, and of course it is deeply traumatic. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to everybody on the call. Please do join Caabu if you haven't. Come to our future events, and if you can, write to your MPs and put whatever pressure you can to get this horror to stop. To bring an end to all of this suffering, whether it's in Gaza or in Lebanon or anywhere else, because I think it's long overdue to end all of this. And I just hope that at some point Lebanon will be able to, as you said, start recovering and get onto that path of recovery, which will be, I'm afraid, a very long one. But the sooner it can, the better. Thank you.
Can
everybody.
I just say something quickly, Chris?
Please.
Chris, can I just say 2 words? Yes. First, I want to, one last comment is, I think this argument that's been used about Israel has a right to self-defense has become a very elastic one, because we don't know where self-defense starts and where it stops. And I think this is something we all need to also push on and talk about. Everyone has a right to self-defense, including the Lebanese and the Palestinians. So I think that needs to stop. And the second thing I wanted to say is thank you for everyone for your questions and for joining today. And thank you, Chris, for having me. I appreciate that.
Well, it's been our pleasure. Thank you very much. Wish we could speak in happier times. Thank you, everybody, for